Good morning. Good morning.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday, August 4th, Morning Deuce. I'm D-Spin. Hope you guys are making it through the week pretty well. We're kicking. We're almost there to the end. Today's Deuce is mostly going to center around this one question. Did Instagram kill Snapchat? It's a good question. If you're an Instagram user, an avid Instagram user, you know that the company, which is owned by Facebook, just released 24-hour stories with filters and writing, basically copying the story format that Snapchat has become so successful with. Now, the move comes at an interesting time for me in particular because just last weekend, I had an interview with my friend Ted, who runs an extremely successful online website and social media presence, and that interview will be released tomorrow, so I encourage you to listen to it because Ted is the most interesting man in the world, and he drives the most incredible, rare cars in the most amazing places and meets the most incredible people. But anyway, I picked his brain, I asked him in a very long but very cool interview all these stories about his life and how he got to where he was, and I asked him, what do you think of Snapchat? Do you think it is as important and as successful? Big entrepreneurs are saying it's the next big thing in social media. And what Ted told me was he thinks people make a mistake because they think social media is linear, but it isn't. He said for so long technology, more or less he was implying, and I think it's in the interview, that technology has been sort of a linear thing. Oh, a phone is made, and then a better phone is made, and then a better phone is made. Computer is made, then a better operating system, then a better operating system. But what he was saying was he thought at this point in time social media had become non-linear, where Facebook isn't giving you the same opportunities and creating the same feed that Instagram is. And they're not the same experience, and they can both survive together and evolve together, and you don't have to give up either. Just like with Snapchat, it was providing something different to what people wanted to consume, and it wasn't really part of the linear progression of social media. It was just another alternative way for people to consume the thoughts and feelings and information of others. Now, that was last Saturday. And only a day ago, I believe, a day and a half ago, as soon as Instagram came out with its Snapchat-style story, he texted me and said, Snapchat is dead, which we had an interesting conversation about because I don't particularly completely agree with him, but he did have some really good points. But let's talk about that. So, Snapchat, you can post your story 24 hours. Anyone can watch you. You can send it to individuals or put it on your board. Snapchat excels right now just because it's very easy to message back and forth with people, and it offers that whole 24-hour and the filters and the writing. Well, Instagram doesn't offer direct messaging systems that are anywhere near as good as Snapchat's. I mean, that's kind of one of the worst parts of Instagram is the person-to-person messaging. Basically, everything on Instagram is sort of curated on your own feed. It's not really that easy to comment. It's mostly just likes and posts, and you can look up a person and read. But what they do offer that's much better than Snapchat currently is the ability to look up someone. So, for example, if I want the Instagram account of David Ortiz, I can put in David Ortiz and pretty quickly find his Instagram and see all the cool photos that he's put up over time. Whereas if I look for the Snapchat account of David Ortiz, it's significantly harder to find. It requires often a third-party search, as in me going on Google and trying to find out what is David Ortiz's Snapchat account. And then if I find it and he hasn't posted within 24 hours, there's nothing for me to see there. Whereas Instagram always leaves you with something to see for that person, even if they haven't posted within the 24-hour frame. So it's a lot easier to see person to person. They already have that set up better. And I think because the technology isn't that much harder to get from where they are to a better messaging system, they will soon swallow up Snapchat's ability to sort of leave impermanent messages. And they will get better filters and better geolocations. Snapchat will probably respond because they bought Bitmoji. If you don't know what Bitmoji is, it's those little kind of cool cartoons that you can design to look like yourself, and they have little captions. It's like a personalized emoji. That's what the image is on my Morning Deuce. That's a Bitmoji that I designed of myself. My family text message, we Bitmoji back and forth all the time. Everyone has a Bitmoji, and we all send them to each other. It's like our group family way of communicating. And Snapchat bought that. So pretty soon, if they're smart, they will integrate that technology. You can already send Bitmojis, but they will integrate a way that you can Bitmoji filters onto yourself and send that type of stuff. And that will get people back onto Snapchat for a little bit. I do think that's the future and that's coming. But Snapchat has something special that I think will make them better. And that is they need to switch the way that they do things and not be a person-driven social media organization, but an event-driven social media organization. And so what I mean by that is Instagram invented sort of location tagging where you can look something up by location or tag where you are, and it's very cool. And Snapchat has filters that let you know where you are and live stories that you can submit to. And then they also have stories about a location. So when the Kentucky Derby was going on, they had someone at the Kentucky Derby who was filming things with graphics underneath them. And then they would also have anyone who was at the Kentucky Derby could submit to the Kentucky Derby story, and someone, curated together a nice Snapchat event of that thing that was happening, that event. And people who wanted to see Snapchat's sort of unfiltered coverage of the Kentucky Derby could see it. And it was very cool. I watched about half of it before the race, then I watched the race, and then afterwards I watched a little bit more, and I found it really cool and a completely different way to consume the event. But what they do have is a really unbelievable location technology. In order for me to explain that, I have to tell you a little bit about my experience with Snapchat. And I probably know more about Snapchat than pretty much anyone you've ever met, unless you know someone who works at the company. And that's because I have been through a pretty significant job application process twice with Snapchat, though ultimately unsuccessful both times. But I learned a ton about the company because I was fascinated with what they were doing, and I saw its growth in terms of an event-oriented storytelling setting a little while ago. It was actually a little over a year ago in July when I was sort of perusing the internet and in different ways, just looking at jobs and opportunities. And I was thinking about Snapchat and its development. And when I went on, I saw that they were trying to open an office in New York, and they were going to do news and technology, news-oriented events. Like they were going to cover with their new technology news events. Now, this is right when city filters just came out. Like filters had just started. They weren't even selling filters yet to organizations or movies or whatever. Just basic beginning of filters. And they wanted to do something news-oriented. And I have a very good friend that I've known since kindergarten who's worked at Snapchat for maybe 3 or 4 years on the technology side. So he's obviously very well informed about everything that's going on there. So I saw that application. I thought it was interesting. I submitted some different things just because I was really fascinated with the company and the way that it was growing. I'd already been a user for a long time because when I was coaching high school swimmers, they're like always the first age group to find these new apps, these new great social media things. And the major demographic for Snapchat, I believe, is 14 to 21 or 16 to 21. So I saw what they were doing. I thought it was, interesting, and I checked it out, and I ended up enjoying the way that it lets you communicate with others. And so I, work that into eventually looking at the website, whatnot, apply for this job in New York. It's to cover news and politics, to be a curator for news and political events. So they ask me they accept my first stage of the application. I get through that. Then they ask me to create a story. And I have 24 hours to cover a political event, a news-related political event that's going on in a creative way using only Snapchat and never putting myself on the screen. And so I did that, and maybe I'll post those below this, some links to some of that stuff. But I posted that. I did a story at that time about the Confederate flag coming down off the State House in South Carolina. This was just after the Charleston church shooting, where Dylan Roof, who was kind of someone who was still advocating for the Confederacy and had some white power movement sort of things going on in his history, went into a historical African-American church in Charleston and killed, I believe it was 9 people. And then that sort of parlayed into, does South Carolina need to take down the Confederate flag that flies above its state house, which I was pretty well informed about because I went to the University of South Carolina. So there's a lot of reasons I like this topic. I decided to make a sign that said, "Help me get a job at Snapchat," and go to the beach, which I lived about 10 minutes from, hold that up, wait for people to look at me like, "Oh, that's interesting, I love Snapchat," or like, "I'm curious." And I just asked them, do they think the flag should be taken down or not? I got a lot of great answers. What makes Snapchat an interesting medium when you're telling a long-term story is you can't change the order of the clips. So if you're trying to get man on the street, which is what that's called, like little random passerby's opinions, you have to get a bunch of them and then delete a couple and keep the ones you like before you move on to something else. So for example, I couldn't do 5 man on the streets, then talk to an official, and then 5 more man on the streets, and eventually put all the random person interviews at the front. I have to keep them in the order in which I've recorded them. I can only delete things. So I probably asked 25 people, and the split was mostly even. A lot of people, it was probably like 12-8. They should take the flag down in Southern California. So I did all of that, and then I went to my news station and told them all I was going to do a side project. Some people had kind of a vibe, others didn't, but I'm always doing side projects, so nobody was really shocked. And I said, I'm doing this thing about the flag, and I want to see how our news station covers it in reference to the way that I interviewed all of these people and their opinions on the beach. And so I went and kind of followed a couple reporters throughout the day that were covering the story, showed how it showed up on national TV. In between those clips, I interviewed a couple producers and anchors about their thoughts, about what they, thought about the story or the process the story has taken and its evolution. So it kind of gave you a behind-the-scenes look of how a story is curated on television news. Put that all together. Eventually, I actually did a Lyft and Uber ride afterwards because I was a driver at that point in time, asked a couple people in my car what they thought about different political things. Put that all together. You have 24 hours, so you really have to, put a cool story together. Submitted it to Snapchat. Asked my friend, said, "Hey, I submitted this. Do you think you can maybe write an email to somebody? Like, what can you do?" So he sends an email. The office in New York is just opening. Like, I think it's probably maybe even open for 5 months, and I'm pretty sure they shut it down after a little bit. But the head of the Snapchat news division calls me after that process, says he really liked my video, and then does a phone interview with me asking about what I do at my station, all these things. Eventually, they fly me out to New York, put me up in Times Square in this sort of tech, crazy, weird, new age hotel, which was right next door. It was nice, but it was just like super gadgety and clearly like some new age New York City vibes. I was kind of thrown off. I'd never been in a sort of tech bougie hotel. The nice hotels I'm in are like nice because they have a lot of history and sort of like mystique, antiqueness behind them, and this was nice because everything like talked to you and was super digitized. It was a little weird, but it was a great hotel. And then I met with the team in their new New York City office. I met with like 5 or 6 people. They had me curate a story for, I believe it was like some place in Alabama. They just made a city story there. So I got to use the technology, see all the snaps that are put in, see how they can trim them, how they can put together those snaps, how they add and subtract. I met with a lot of people, very intelligent, wonderful people, smart. But I would say the problem with Snapchat as an organization has been that they can't monetize very well. They're worth a lot of money because people are buying and investing in them at a very high rate. Millions and millions of dollars. I think it's a $20 billion company because the investment is so high. But the actual income they're making isn't overwhelmingly high. They're still having trouble with how they're monetizing. It's the type of company where you make a huge investment, let's say, and you buy chunks of the company before it hits the stock market at $8 a share. And finally, when it makes an independent public offer at $20, $24, something like that, these are hypothetical numbers, people don't really think it's worth that, and they start offering 19, 18, 17, 16. This is just exactly what we saw with Groupon and sort of other big kind of tech-oriented companies. And people are still willing to sell those $8 shares at 17 or 16 and double their initial investment. And then after the company makes public offering, it doesn't really shoot up in value. So it's kind of a company that has a very high value because people want to invest in it because it has so many eyeballs. But the reason they haven't gone public yet, in my opinion, from everything I've read, is that they just don't monetize that well. They know they have eyeballs, but they don't know how to get it. It's not a good platform that lets you view ads. You can click right through the ads. So the ways that they can monetize are they pay for people to put, Minions filters for the new movie that's coming out underneath their shot. Or they pay, people will pay to have the Discover channels, like the CNN Discover channel. I'm sure they pay a fee and those type of things. But it's not a huge money maker. Whereas Instagram, within it makes a ton of money already because, you see sponsored ads all the time. Just like with Facebook, ads on the side. Instagram has all the sponsored stuff in the middle. So that's a way that they can make a solid chunk more money. Anyway, I digress. So my interview with Snapchat goes great. But one of the things that they told me, which ultimately I didn't get the job, they went with like 1 or 2 other, I think maybe 2 or 3 people made it to New York, and they end up picking the other people. But the thing they have that's going for them the best, which is why they need to be event-oriented, is they have these incredible geolocation filters. And that's what the head of news was so excited about, is he was saying with the geolocation technology we have, we can, let's say something's happening between Israel and Palestine, and Palestinian media is preventing their citizens from seeing or being exposed to what's happening. We can actually take stories and Snapchat photos from Palestine or from Israel and geolocate it so that they can be viewed in Israel or Palestine in the other state. So if something's happening in Israel, Palestinian media won't show it to the Palestinians. They can geolocate the story so that people in Palestine can go on their phones and see snaps of individuals in Israel documenting whatever the event is. And that is just a crazy different type of information share. And that's what they need to keep being successful. They need to figure out a way to give you notifications that are like, hey, you're in this area and there's a building on fire nearby you. I know it's nearby you. Look at the snaps. Like, they give you a little notification, then you flip up, you look at the story, you click, and you're like, damn, that's between me and work. And there's a couple snaps of people being stuck in traffic, and there's a snap of a police officer giving me some information. I have to leave for work earlier, or I have to drive a different direction. Or even like, damn, that's down the street from me. Let me go out there and send another snap and add to whatever this thing is, whatever this story is becoming. Or it can even be used in some type of different type of safety way. Let's say you're in a mall and there's a shooting. They can't always give that information to you over, other cell phone media. You're not always going to get a phone call, hey, something's going down. But if you got a notification, Snapchat put up an alert and said, this is happening in this area, and you're like, oh my God, I'm in this mall. Like, they can put up a geolocation in a very small area. Holy crap, that's right where I am. You get the notification. You can save lives. People can get out of there sooner. People can hide. People can snap something, add it to the story that can share information with other people within the facility. I mean, that's an actual tool that's based on an event. People can then report on that event with more accuracy over local news. People can communicate whether certain individuals are safe or not safe. They can better communicate photos of whomever the suspect is of whatever event. This event-oriented geolocation is how Snapchat can succeed in the future, because they don't have the same ability to be person to person as an Instagram, where I can look up Selena Gomez on Instagram so much easier and see everything that she's ever done. Snapchat doesn't have quite that same ability. They need to be event-oriented. And after my first foray with Snapchat, which didn't work out, which I still felt good about, I sent an email like every month to the news director there, just updating him on what I was doing and how I believed in the company. Because basically what he told me was, hey, we really like what you're doing, but we had all these managers come in and they say, we can't build up our New York office and our news department right now. We can't build up all of this stuff. We just can't take you on right now, which was fine. So I send an email every couple months, and then January, another position opens, and they ask me to do a similar thing again, a different type of story, because now I'm doing stuff about the elections. And that's, my forte, but they wanted just different type of storytelling. So what I did that day for that storytelling was I went around, and this is what makes Snapchat so cool, is I did driverless cars and Uber. How would you react to if Uber and driverless cars are the same thing? You get an Uber, but there's nobody in it, which is our future. I mean, Uber, Lyft, Ford, VW, all these major companies I've talked about on the podcast joined together to try to push through laws to make it easier. So I did the same thing, interviewed some people, followed some journalists. This time I got in an Uber ride, took it to work, interviewed the person who was driving me. Hey, what would it be like for you if your job was taken away and replaced by a robot? Do you think a robot could do your job? How would this impact you? Da-da-da. Long story. Eventually I went to Ford, interviewed someone who was in charge of technology there. I interviewed people selling cars at a Toyota dealership. How would it change them? It is so easy to get someone to answer an interview when it's 10, 15-second clips with your phone. And you can just take a photo of them and write text over it, add graphics, add all these emojis. You can communicate a story so much cooler in such a unique way. It's a very cool medium, right? But it's based around an event. Doing it around an individual doesn't have that same power. And so that's where I think Snapchat needs to push itself if it's going to survive the sort of Instagram copycat move that happened. And yes, I did, again, have another interview after that, and then another Skype interview after that, and I think a fifth interview. Finally, like me and maybe one or two other finalists, and ultimately they decided not to go with me again. The elections was winding down. There was different, I didn't get it, but I still feel great. I made the end of thousands and thousands of people trying to apply to one of the fastest growing tech companies in the world. I mean, I feel great about it. And it was an incredible learning experience. But even with the debates, they got tons of views on the things that they did covering the debates, because there would be someone interviewing candidates, someone in the crowd snapping who wasn't an actual reporter, and then they would have a Snapchat reporter covering the debates. The other thing that Snapchat does, event-oriented, is that they can show you an event that someone else can't get television access to. So, for example, Snapchat can go to the Olympics in Rio and Snapchat you what is happening at an event. They don't even need to pay to go there. They can do it for free. They can have fans at the events using Snapchat, filter them under events, and I can look in my basement, and they've televised to me through snaps for free what is going on at an event. Instagram currently can't really do that, because they don't file, they don't organize by event. So I can flip on my phone next week when the Olympics is out and look up event by event and watch it. So that surpasses and sort of circumvents television contracts. That's a huge thing. a television contract becomes less valuable. And that's why NBC, which owns all the rights to the Olympics, they made a deal with Snapchat where Snapchat paid a small for them, but pretty big for everyone else, amount of money to be able to broadcast a bunch of Olympic events. They did it because Snapchat was going to do it anyway. So NBC knew they couldn't stop them. They knew people were going to add events to their story that were there. They knew Snapchat was going to do it. So the best thing they could do, instead of tying them up in a lawsuit that was never going to win, is get a lesser amount of money from that organization, and then Snapchat could send its own people and feel comfortable about interviewing Olympic athletes, as opposed to getting herky-jerky versions of everything. So that's what makes Snapchat so brilliant. The fact that they can send 3 people to a debate, which Fox paid $15 million to put on, right? And they can send 3 or 4 people, the cost of their plane flights and their hotels. Those 3 or 4 people can interview and edit different snaps that are coming in. They can take all the snaps from the audience for free, and they can curate a completely different story, which doesn't have a bunch of talking heads deciding what you see. It's usually just filtered by 1 or 2 people taking raw footage and kind of trimming it down. So that is why I do not think Instagram will be taking over Snapchat. Unless Snapchat is dumb, continues to struggle monetizing, and continues to force themselves to be a person-to-person medium. And I will say, for the amount of incredibly smart, capable people at Snapchat, there were moments where I felt like their technology was so good and they grew so fast, they definitely had management problems where maybe not everyone was on the same page. It felt like people were trying to hire me, but maybe other people hadn't signed off on it. They were trying to build up one project, but maybe there were resources at another project. I was getting tossed between recruiters a lot. People weren't always answering the phone calls or calling me when they said they would. It felt a lot like the television show Silicon Valley, which is one of my favorites, where, all these brilliant people are in a room and the management doesn't always have everyone's connection, and maybe they'll make a decision and not really know how they're going to do it. It's just like, I want this and you have to figure out how to do it. And then these people work really hard to figure out how to do it. And then right when they're going to do it, it's like, actually, we really need this. Sometimes it feels like that. It is kind of the quintessential. Every time I see Silicon Valley, it rings a bell about my Snapchat experiences in my head. So I don't think they're going to replace each other. I don't think Snapchat is dead. I think if Snapchat doesn't fully pivot to events and companies and organize that way, they will die. They will die. But I know that they're smart enough and their geolocation technology is good enough and their coverage of events is good enough that they will be able to thrive in that department, while Instagram will thrive looking up by person, celebrity, friend, or person-to-person chats. And until Instagram can keep up with Snapchat's ability to curate by event, they will never be able to completely destroy what has become one of the world's fastest growing tech companies in Snapchat. And that is the very long part 1 of the Deuce. Part 2 will be short. I told you, it's going to tie in a little bit. So I told you I interviewed with the person who's the head of Snapchat and wrote him a letter once a month, even though he didn't respond for a long time before interviewing a second time with the company. And because I'm a journalist and I did my research, when I found I was getting a phone interview with him and then flown out to meet him, I looked him up. His name's Peter Hamby. He's well accomplished. He worked at CNN for a while. Very smart guy, very nice, easy guy to talk to. Just a pleasure to kind of be around. I looked him up, and he was a fellow at Harvard. He had a fellowship there, and he wrote a fellowship paper. And the name of the paper is, Did Twitter Kill the Boys on the Bus? And basically the concept of the paper is, he was someone who followed the 2008 presidential election, and I believe it was 2008 and 2012, and mostly 2012, actually. And basically what he found out was what used to be a group of the most accomplished kind of political journalists in the country used to get on a bus and follow the presidential candidates all around the country as they went from stop to stop, covering everything they did. And because Twitter became popular right at that area, companies were still sending out reporters to follow on the bus and try to get inside information. But ultimately, campaigns were feeling like reporters were trying to kind of catch them in the wrong scenario. So they stopped interacting with reporters so much and started putting out a ton more of their information on Twitter because they could monitor the content themselves. And now we see in 2016 elections and future elections how Twitter has made it so that I can stay in San Diego, California for the majority of the presidential election process and still provide really, really good coverage, because the connection to the campaign now isn't through so much the people within the campaign as it is through the campaign's push through social media. And then, a couple events and a couple of insider scoops, but you can do those couple things while following the Twitter feeds of all the important characters. It's a very good read. It's long. I recommend reading it, but if you're a political junkie or if you are interested in how social media changes regular media, it's absolutely worth a read. Read the whole thing just so I could ask him pertinent questions, and a quote in it stood out to me, and I still remember it now. And I've looked it up in other times, and I can't quite verify it anywhere else, but he's a really well-respected journalist, so I'm sure it legitimately happened. And I've heard sort of paraphrased versions of something similar. But this is the direct quote, and it's after an election. And this is what it says. And it's about 3/4 of the way through the piece. It says, quote, "Well, I was disappointed again this year in our inability to come to grasp the issues on the daily broadcasts on the evening news," the network anchor admitted. "We say this every 4 years, and every 4 years we determine that it's not going to happen again, that we're not going to be swept up by the panoply of campaigning and stick to the substance. I think we made a greater effort this time. Each time we come a little closer to it, but don't quite bring it off." And then that's the end of the quote, and it says, "The newsman uttering those sad words was Walter Cronkite, and that year was 1976. Every race for the White House ends with some hand-wringing by political media, a few half-hearted admissions that the coverage was flawed and frivolous, and solemn promises to be more substantive and rigorous the next time around." So basically, what he's saying is, no matter how you cover it, whether it was 1976 or even today, social media or not, the sort of fanfare and passion behind the election often gets in the way of the actual issues. And I see that this year, did the price of someone's dress and the comment made by this person and who this person's husband is and how he's affiliated to this and this and this. And oftentimes that's all distractions to the simple question of, does this candidate want to do the things that you think they should do for the country? Or does this candidate have the power to get done what you think and want to get done? Or do they complete what they say they're going to complete? Are they someone worth, handing the keys to the car, so to speak? And all of those things that get in the way by the media and otherwise are distractions. And I think that is something that every political reporter gets caught in, as you have to cover every day what's going on. I mean, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton are in the news every single day, but they're not always doing something newsworthy every single day. So if you can find that nugget that enough people can repeat and catch in the echo chamber over and over again, you've accomplished something. And people get bored and they look for that nugget and they stretch for that nugget. And then oftentimes you're talking about something that has very little relevance to the candidate's plan for how to run a country. And that's always stood out to me. It's like, okay, 1976, and Walter Cronkite was saying, we say every year we're going to follow the issues, but we fail. So, yeah, maybe it's up to us individuals, because we now have the power on social media to follow all of these candidates and all of these political reporters, to take it upon ourselves to not get distracted by the hoopla and be more substantive in the way we think about how a campaign works. That's it. That is the Morning Deuce. Tomorrow, an awesome interview with Ted Gushu, the executive editor of Petrolicious.com. It's going to be awesome. He's the man. So tune into that. Also, I have a Twitter account, DSpinWin. DSpin for the win. I have an Instagram account, DSpinWin, and I have a Snapchat account, which is hashtagtrenders. So, yeah, you can find me in all the different social medias, because it's non-linear and nothing's going to die. So I'm everywhere. Snip, snap, up, down, all over the place. Get ready for it. Happy Thursday. I'm out.